Welcome to Granny's Justice, a place where secrets are spoken and silence finally ends. The sound of it still rings in my ears, the slap of my own son's hand across my face. Not behind closed doors, but in public, in front of my oldest friends, in front of strangers who stared at me like I was nothing. That was the moment my world shattered. And that was the moment! I swear I'd make him regret it, because a mother's silence may break, but her justice never dies.
My name is Martha Louise Henderson. I live in Savannah, Georgia, United States of America. I am 72 years old, a widow, a grandmother, and I am about to tell you the story of the day my dignity was stolen and how I took it back. Before I begin, let me say this directly to you who are listening right now. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your country. Hit the like button if you believe no mother should ever be humiliated by her own child. Share the story, because what happened to me could happen to any of us. It was a bright Sunday afternoon in Savannah. Spanish moss hung heavy from the oak trees. The air carried a faint breath of sea salt, and laughter drifted across the narrow cobblestone streets. My friends and I had gathered at the Riverbend Cafe, a small spot by the river where boats moaned against the docks and the scent of sweet tea seemed to linger forever. My three closest friends, Diane, Ruth, and Marjorie, had been my companions through marriages, births, heartbreaks, and funerals. We were four women bound by decades of secrets and survival. That day, we sat at our favorite corner table by the wide windows. Sunlight spilled across our faces, softening our wrinkles, turning our silver hair almost golden. For a moment, we looked like girls again. We laughed louder than we should have. We teased each other, swapped stories about our children and grandchildren, even poked fun at the tourists stumbling under the southern heat. For a little while, I forgot the heaviness in my chest, the loneliness of my house after Harold died, the quiet disappointments that had crept into my later years. And then, the cafe door opened. My son David Henderson walked in. But he didn't walk in like a son greeting his mother. He stormed in, jaw locked, fists curled, eyes blazing with a fury that didn't belong in a family. "Mom," he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you need to stop embarrassing me." The cafe went silent. Forks froze midair. A couple stopped chewing. My friends stiffened, eyes wide with shock. I blinked, stunned, embarrassing him. I had been sipping coffee, laughing with friends. What could he possibly mean? "David, I don't understand," before the words even left my lips. His hand cut the air. The sound of his palm against my cheek cracked through the cafe like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side. Gasps erupted around me. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Marjorie whispered, "Oh my God." Ruth reached toward me, helpless to undo what had already been done. The sting burned into my skin. But it wasn't the pain that broke me. It was the humiliation, the betrayal. The cruel realization that the boy I had nursed through fevers, the man whose tuition I had paid by working double shifts, the son I had defended against the world, had just struck me. And he hadn't done it in anger behind closed doors. He had done it here, in public, in front of strangers, in front of my lifelong friends. The cafe was silent, but for the pounding of my own heartbeat. David stood there, chest rising and falling, eyes cold, before turning on his heel and walking out, leaving me with a burning cheek, and a room full of witnesses who didn't know where to look. I sat frozen. My hands shook against my coffee cup. Tears slipped down before I even realized they were there. The silence was unbearable. Every stare, another dagger. Humiliation isn't like pain. Pain you can swallow, grit through, hide behind a smile. But humiliation seeps into your bones. It makes you want to vanish, to fold in on yourself until nothing remains. And in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to disappear. Martha. Diane leaned toward me, her voice trembling. Honey, are you okay? What could I possibly say? That I was fine, that I wasn't broken. Neither was true. My dignity had been ripped from me in a single strike. I stood, excused myself, and walked out with pride alone holding me up. My friends wanted to follow, but I waved them back. If I crumbled now, I would never rise again. Outside, the streets of Savannah felt heavier than ever. Every step echoed the whispers of the cafe, pity from some, judgment from others. People are quick to assign blame where it doesn't belong. But as I walked beneath the mossy oaks, something inside me began to shift. The humiliation burned, yes. But beneath the ashes, a slow fire flickered to life. I realized something that day. I had been silent too long. I had endured too much. And my silence had been mistaken for weakness. That slap wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. And if my son thought I would crumble quietly, then he had no idea who his mother truly was. The walk home from the cafe felt like it stretched for miles. Even though it was only 6 blocks through Savannah's historic district. The cobblestones beneath my feet seemed sharper, the moss-draped oaks heavier. Every step carried the echo of that slap. I pressed trembling fingers to my cheek as if I could rub the sting away. But nothing could erase the look in my son's eyes when he struck me. By the time I reached our little white cottage with the blue shutters, the Home Herald, and I had bought 40 years ago, my legs felt like stone. The screen door creaked the way it always had, a sound that used to welcome me. That afternoon, it sounded like the tired sigh of a house that had seen too much. I sank into the old rocking chair on the porch, the same chair where I had cradled David as a baby. My fingers found the worn groove on the armrest and traced it the way I once traced the curve of his sleeping cheek. I could almost feel the weight of his small body in my arms again, his fever-soft hair against my collarbone, the tiny breaths that had once kept me awake through the night. How did that warm, needy boy become the man who had humiliated me in front of strangers? Memories came like tidewater, sudden and relentless. When he was 5, he fell from the pecan tree and broke his arm. I remember the sting of his tears soaking my blouse as I carried him to the car. Harold white-knuckled at the wheel, while I whispered, "It's okay, baby. Mama's got you." At 12, he came home with his shirt ripped from a schoolyard scuffle. The principal called him a troublemaker. Harold scolded, but I defended him. "He's just passionate," I told anyone who would listen. Maybe I was blind. Maybe love makes you blind. When Harold fell ill, I became 2 people at once, the wife who cried in the closet, and the woman who kept the house standing. I took extra shifts at the library, cleaned other people's homes on weekends until my hands ached, and sold the one thing Harold loved enough to cry for, his old fishing boat. I did it so David could go to college without carrying the weight of our debts. I wanted him to walk into the world with his head high. I never told him the cost. I wanted his life to feel full, not frayed by worry. I remember the day he graduated. I wore a thrift store dress and clapped until my palms stung. He hugged me a quick, awkward squeeze and said, "Thanks, Mom." Those 2 words were all the coin I needed to feel I had done right. I carried them like a talisman for years. Now, sitting on that porch decades later, those memories felt like knives. Every late night, every missed meal, every small humiliation I swallowed, so he could have more. They all echoed back into my face the moment his hand hit mine. Neighbors passed by, and I saw the quick sideways glance of Mrs. Campbell next door. Savannah is small. Gossip moves faster than the river. By nightfall, half the block would know. I wasn't just hurt. I was branded. Humiliation settles on you in a different way than pain. pain you can grit your teeth through. Humiliation crawls into the marrow and makes you want to sink into the ground. But as the cicadas droned and the humid air pressed close, a sharper thought pierced the shame. I would not let this be my ending inside. I pulled down the diary I'd kept since Harold's illness, its leather cracked, pages yellowed, with years of secrets. I opened to a blank page, my hand trembling at first, then finding a steadiness that surprised me. I wrote, July 14th, today, in front of friends and strangers, my son struck me. The sting is fading from my cheek, but humiliation burns in my soul. I will not hide this. I will not bury it. I will fight. Not just for myself, but for every mother who has been silenced. My name is Martha Louise Henderson. I am from Savannah, Georgia. This is not where my story ends. The words felt like a contract when I closed the book. I set the diary on the kitchen table, the lamplight catching the embossed letters on the cover, and I whispered into the quiet, David Henderson, you may be my son, but you will learn what happens when you break a mother's dignity. You will learn what Granny's justice feels like. That night, sleep did not come easy. Memories and plans tangled in my head. I relived the slap with the clarity of film, his jaw tight, the room freezing, the way people averted their eyes. I thought of all the little choices that had led me here, the sacrifices I had made, the times I had swallowed my pride to keep peace. The moments I had stayed silent because I wanted him to be loved, not judged. Silence had been a currency I'd paid for his future. I realized, with a painful honesty, that my silence had been mistaken for weakness. Morning brought a thin, gray light and a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The decision I wrote in ink the night before hardened into action. I would not let the story stop at shame. If the world saw me as small, I would show them the woman beneath. If those who had judged whispered about what I must have done to deserve it, I would give them truth instead of rumor. If my son wanted to wage a war of humiliation, I would respond with a strategy he could not ignore. First, I would gather evidence not to destroy him, but to protect myself. If the world had witnesses to the slap, the world should also know the history behind it. I would document every slight, every cut remark, every time he tried to push me out of family matters. I would find allies, friends who had seen him in other moods, neighbors who could corroborate patterns, a lawyer who understood elder rights. Shame thrives in secrecy. Light burns it away. Second, I would reclaim my voice. I would tell the truth, not as a drama, but as a ledger of what had been done and what I had given. I would speak to people who would listen and to institutions that could intervene if things escalated. Silence had been my habit. Now it would be my enemy. Third, I would prepare for the practical. My finances were modest, but they were mine. I would make sure my affairs were in order. I would change locks if I had to. I would keep copies of bank statements, medical records, phone logs, the small papers that formed the backbone of a proof. All this I planned quietly, with the patience of years. I did not shout. I did not race to social media. I moved like the tide, slow, inevitable, and impossible to ignore when it came in. Word began to spread as expected. A neighbor knocked one evening and left a plate of biscuits on my porch, eyes downcast. Ruth and Marjorie called, their voices small and fierce both, offering support and reminders that I didn't have to do this alone. Diane brought over old photo albums and sat with me under the kitchen light while we sifted through faces and moments that proved I had always been more than gossip could reduce me to. Each small act of kindness patched the ragged edges of my courage. But not everyone offered comfort. A cousin of David's stopped by thin-lipped, suggesting I let it go for the family. I told him, quietly but clearly, that I would not be dismissed. Letting it go would be letting him win. Letting him walk away without consequence would be letting every mother who had been smacked, shoved aside, or gaslit by a child believe she must hold the shame in secret. I would not do that to myself or to them. A week passed, and the ache on my cheek was gone, but the plan I had sketched in my diary took shape. I met with a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. She listened without judgment, asked practical questions, and told me about restraining orders, documentation, and the little-known power of formal complaints in protecting elders. I began to keep a log. Dates, times, words, gestures, facts that could not be argued away by emotion. At night, I read through the old letters Harold had sent me when we were courting. His scribbles, petty, foolish, tender, reminded me who I had been and who I still was. He had always told me I had the backbone of an oak. I had forgotten that image in the rush of years. Now I remembered it and let it root me. People started to notice a change. Where once I would have stooped beneath shame, I began to stand straighter. I walked with a purpose that lifted me above idle pity. When neighbors offered help, I accepted it. When gossip swirled, I did not rise to its bait. I let the work be quiet and steady, the kind of work that builds a house of proof rather than a house of cards. And through it all, the meetings, the calls, the small legal steps, an ember of something else warmed inside me, a fierce, unexpected compassion for David. Not for what he had done, but for the boy he had once been. Grief and anger braided together, making my resolve softer at its edges. This was not merely about punishment. It was about accountability and the restoration of dignity for both of us, if possible. The day came when I decided to confront him not with a shout, but with papers and witnesses. I did not want a scene. I wanted resolution. I wanted him to see that his actions had consequences, and that his mother was not a woman to be humiliated into silence. When he came to the house that afternoon, he found me waiting at the kitchen table. A cup of tea between my hands and the diary open beside a neat stack of notes. My lawyer was not present. This confrontation was mine to lead. I wanted the first step to be honest and human. David paused on the threshold, the same boy's posture briefly returning to him, shoulders tightening, hands balling, the instinct to run or fight that lives in wounded men. He saw the log on the table. His mouth went hard. I held his eyes and said, quietly, "We need to talk." He closed the door behind him. The house smelled of boiled tea and old paper. For a moment, the years fell away and I saw him as he had once been, a small hand in mine, a kiss on a fevered brow. Then the memory reshaped into the man who had struck me in public. "Why did you do it?" I asked. Not accusatory, just a question that needed an answer. He looked down, the wheels turning somewhere behind his face. "You humiliated me," he muttered. "You always do." "You think laughing with friends humiliated you?" I said. "Or is there something else?" He glared, then turned away. The conversation could have ended there, in a spiral of accusations. But I had learned patience. I had learned that truth, when kept tidy and documented, has its own force. I laid out what I had recorded. The night at the cafe, the witnesses, the names of people who would back me up. I spoke of the years I had worked to send him forward, of the nights I'd handed over my sleep so his future would be easier. I read aloud a passage from the diary, not to shame him, but to show him the ledger of a life of care. He listened, jaw clenched, and for a fraction of a second something like regret flickered in his eyes. Then he turned his back and left without another word. He walked out, and that too was a kind of answer. It was the kind of answer that said he wasn't ready to take responsibility yet. But it also proved something I had suspected. This fight wasn't about a single moment. It was about patterns, and patterns can be changed if the person who repeats them chooses to change. In the days that followed, my resolve did not waver. I continued to gather proof, to talk to professionals, to accept support. I reported the incident formally. I did not do it for vengeance alone. I did it to create a record so that if things escalated, there would be no question about what had happened. I wanted protection, not spectacle. And slowly, very slowly, the town began to see me as something else. Not merely the old woman who had been slapped, but the woman who would not be shoved into the shadows. People offered small gestures of respect, an extra nod at the grocery, a neighbor mowing my lawn without being asked, a clerk who greeted me with genuine warmth. It was not the same as erasing the hurt, but it mattered. Every small act reconstructed the shape of my life. Still, the wound between David and me yawned open. There were nights when I cried into my pillow, not just with anger, but with grief for the son I had raised. There were other nights when I sat with a diary and wrote not only what had been done to me, but what I might do next to protect myself and others like me. This is where the real work began, not in dramatic confrontations, but in steady, unromantic steps, legal filings, trusted witnesses, financial safeguards, and the slow building of a community that remembers me for more than a single cruel moment. I had been slapped, yes. But I had also been given, oddly, a beginning, a sliver of clarity that made me refuse the role of victim. I chose, from that day forward, to be the architect of my dignity. And if that required exposing ugly truths, gathering paperwork, and standing before people who preferred comfort over challenge, then so be it. I would stand. I would speak. I would make sure that my story and the truth behind that slap could not be buried by silence or dismissed as family drama. Because a mother's justice, when she claims it with courage and care, is not small drama. It is the slow, relentless reclaiming of a life. The next morning, Savannah felt smaller. When I stepped outside to water the azaleas by my porch, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes. Mrs. Campbell's curtains fluttered just a little too long. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins pretended to adjust his mailbox, though he hadn't received a letter in years. Gossip moves faster than the river tide, and now everyone seemed to be watching me. I wasn't just the woman who lived on Magnolia Lane anymore. I was that woman, the one whose son had slapped her in public, at the Piggly Wiggly. Whispers trailed behind me like shadows. That's her. Such a shame. Wonder what she did to provoke him. Those words cut deeper than the slap. People didn't only pity me. Some blamed me, as if any mother could deserve a raised hand from her child. Even church felt different. The pastor's handshake was too gentle, his condolences thin. Some women hugged me quickly, perfume clouding the comfort, their eyes saying, "We're praying for you," from a safe distance. Prayers, yes. But no one wanted to sit next to me on the pew. That night, alone in my kitchen, I stared at the diary again. The clock ticked. I pressed my hand to my cheek where the bruise had faded but the memory hadn't. For a long moment, despair wrapped around me like a heavy quilt. A voice whispered, "Stay quiet. Fade, let this pass." Then another voice, my own, grew louder. "If I stay silent, the slap will define me. If I rise, the slap will only be the beginning." So I chose to rise. The next morning I put on my navy dress, smoothed back my silver hair, and walked straight into Riverbend Cafe. Heads turned, forks paused, people murmured. I sat at the very table where he had struck me. When Emily, the young waitress, asked softly, "Are you sure you want to sit here, Miss Martha?" I smiled and said, "Yes, this is my seat. I won't let anyone take it from me." It wasn't just coffee. It was a declaration. I will not be erased. Not everyone understood. Diane called, trembling. "Maybe it's best to just let this go. He's your son." But Marjorie's voice was fire. "Don't you dare let this go, Martha. If you stay quiet, you teach him, and every other man like him, that it's okay to shame a woman. Don't bow your head. Two roads. Forgive and forget, or fight and remember." I knew which road I would walk. That night I wrote again, but I pictured speaking to you, to the world. My name is Martha Louise Henderson. I live in Savannah, Georgia. If you've ever been humiliated, if someone tried to silence you, Type your city and country in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Don't just listen. Like, share, comment. Every reaction says this: mothers are not invisible. Dignity matters. This was no longer only my story. It had become every woman's story who was told to tuck shame away and smile. So I stopped hiding. I stood straighter. When neighbors offered help, I accepted it. When gossip swirled, I let the work be quiet and steady, documenting what happened. Accepting small acts of kindness, building a record, and finding those who would stand with me. Each small gesture, a neighbor mowing my lawn, a clerk greeting me with warmth, pieced my life back together, one careful brick at a time. But beneath the practical steps, something unexpected took root. Compassion. Not for the act, but for the boy David had been, the feverish child in my arms, the angry teenager after Harold died, anger braided with grief. And my resolve softened with the hope that accountability could lead to healing. Not only punishment. The real work was not dramatic. It was ordinary. Legal appointments, careful logs, phone calls to friends. Nights of writing in that diary, until ink blurred. It was the mundane bravery of making sure my affairs were in order, of speaking truth so it could not be rewritten as family rumor. And slowly, people began to see me differently. Not merely the old woman who had been struck, but the woman who would not be shoved into the shadows. That small shift mattered. It reclaimed pieces of me the slap had tried to steal. Yet the wound with David yawned open. There were nights I wept for the son I had raised, and nights I steeled myself for the next step. I wanted resolution, not spectacle. I wanted responsibility, not more avoidance. So when he finally came to the house, I did not call the lawyer into the room. I wanted the first conversation to be human. He stopped on the threshold, a flash of the boy's posture returning, shoulders tight, fists clenched. I held his gaze and said, quietly, "We need to talk." He told me I humiliated him. I reminded him of what I'd given, read him lines from the diary that traced decades of care. For a moment, regret flickered, then he walked out without another word. The door shut. His leaving was an answer of its own. He was not ready. But it proved the pattern. This was never about one moment. It was about years, so I kept going. I reported the incident. I gathered witnesses. I built a quiet, unshakable backbone of proof, so that if things escalated, the truth wouldn't be buried as family drama. My goal was protection, not revenge. From shame came a beginning. The slap had cracked something open that I refused to let be garbage. I chose to be the architect of my dignity. If exposing ugly truths and standing before others who preferred comfort over challenge was what it took, then I would do it. This was not small drama. It was the slow, relentless reclaiming of a life, and I was done staying quiet. The morning after my declaration in the diary, I woke with a strange calm in my chest. For the first time since the slap, I didn't feel crushed. I felt sharp, purposeful, as if every humiliation I had endured could now be turned into a weapon, if I only sharpened it enough. I brewed my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread out everything I had: the cafe receipt, the napkin Diane had tucked away with lipstick and coffee stains, and the diary entry I had written in the dark. Small things, maybe. But small things, collected carefully, can bring down mountains. Harold used to tell me, if you can't win with strength, win with preparation. That morning, I decided I would prepare as though my very life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Meeting the lawyer by noon, I had buttoned my best navy blazer and walked into the downtown office of Elise Carter, a young lawyer known for fighting hard in cases others overlooked. Her father had once run the practice, and she carried his same reputation for grit. She looked up as I entered, her eyes soft but steady. "Mrs. Henderson," she said gently. "I heard about the incident. Please, sit down." I slid the receipts, the napkin, and my diary across her desk. My voice was firm. My son struck me. In public. I want to know what can be done. Elise studied the items, then leaned back, tapping her pen against her chin. Technically, this is assault. Even one slap counts. And because it happened in public, with witnesses, it's stronger. We can file an incident report. We can even file a civil claim for emotional damages, if you choose. I exhaled. The words civil claim and incident report sounded sterile, like paperwork on a shelf. But beneath those words was something bigger. Accountability. I don't want pity, I said. I want the truth to be on record. I want him to know there are consequences. Elise nodded. Then we start with documentation. Do you have witnesses? I thought of Marjorie's trembling hands, Ruth's shocked face, Diane's quiet tears. Yes, I said firmly. Plenty. Good, Elise replied. Because truth needs voices. Gathering the army of truth that afternoon, I called each of my friends. Marjorie didn't hesitate. I'll write a statement tonight, she promised, her voice shaking but fierce. Ruth sighed heavily but agreed. It broke my heart to see it, Martha. The world should know. Diane's voice was hesitant. I don't want to make things worse. But after a pause, she whispered, I'll back you, piece by piece. I was gathering what Elise had called an army of truth. Collecting evidence over the next week, I became meticulous. I saved every cruel text David sent me. The ones calling me names, demanding money, belittling me. I took photos of the bruise on my cheek before it faded. I even returned to the Riverbend Cafe to speak with Emily, the young waitress. Her eyes widened. Mrs. Henderson, I'll never forget it. He hit you so hard, everyone saw. Would you be willing to put that in writing? I asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. You don't deserve what happened. 2 days later, when she handed me her signed statement, my hands trembled as I folded it into the growing evidence folder. First cracks in David's world, I didn't have to wait long for David to notice. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with his name. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mom, his voice snapped, low and furious. What the hell are you doing? People are talking. I heard you went to a lawyer. I let silence stretch between us. Silence can be sharper than words. You're my mother, he growled. You're supposed to protect me, not. I cut him off, my voice steady as stone. I protected you your whole life, David. From bullies, from hunger, from shame. But I will not protect you from the truth. Not anymore. He cursed so loudly I had to pull the phone from my ear. Then he hung up. For a moment, I stared at the screen. My heart raced, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Appealed to the audience that night, I sat with my diary again, but instead of writing, I imagined speaking directly to the world, to you. If you're listening right now, I whispered into the quiet house, your voice matters. Don't stay silent like I did for so long. If you believe in justice, hit that like button, and tell me where you're listening from, your city, your country. Because I need to know I'm not alone in this fight. I closed the diary with a steady hand. The slap had humiliated me. But my response would define me. And this was only the beginning.